Welcome back to Hannity. Tonight, the fallout from Tuesday's election continues. And if you listen to the narrative being spun by the mainstream media in the wake of President Obama's victory, you'd be led to believe that the Republican Party's finished. You would think that a conservative candidate has no shot at getting elected ever again. But that's simply not the case, and my next guest is here to explain why and to lay out the way forward for the Republican Party. In his latest column, Charles Krauthammer calls on Republicans to stand by the conservative principles that define the GOP. And here's why. According to exit polls conducted by the Associated Press on Tuesday, a majority of Americans still believe that the government does too much, 51% to 43%. In other words, there's still very much an appetite for conservatism here in America. Joining me from Washington to elaborate is syndicated columnist and Fox News contributor Charles Krauthammer. Great to have you, Charles.
Pleasure to be here.
So, Charles, one of the most worrisome things that I saw in the exit polls coming out of last Tuesday were the numbers of Cuban voters in Florida. And one of the exit polls out of Florida showed that the Republicans lost the Cuban vote 49 to 47. Now, that is really a stunner for us as a party. That's always been a community that has shown great strength and support for the Republican Party. But you've got a solution that you write about in your column today. Tell us about that.
Well, I do think on the Cuban issue that has to do with generational change among the Cuban population. The first generation that actually experienced Castroism was fiercely anti-communist, and it's natural that a second generation that grew up in America in freedom and only heard stories about it might be less so that the softer policy of Democrats might appeal to them. But I do think the large issue is the Hispanic vote, of which the Republicans got only 27%. And I do think that they are a natural constituency for the conservative party. They're immigrants, they're striving, they're Catholic, they're religious, they're socially conservative. They ought to be on our side. The real problem is, of course, the question of immigration, legal and illegal. And I do think that it's time. I did not have an epiphany overnight and decided that we have to do amnesty as a result of this election. I wrote a column in April of 2006 when the Bush administration was in power and we had control of two houses of Congress, advocating a policy of border control. Build a fence was the title of the piece was build a fence and then amnesty. You actually enforce the border, you end the illegal immigration. And if you show the American people that the 12 million or so illegal immigrants are the last cohort to come into the U.S. because we will control the border, then I think the inherent generosity of Americans, the fellow feeling and the goodwill will prevail. And an overwhelming majority of Americans will say, if you can assure me that this is the last cohort of illegal immigrants and we control the border, well, yes, let's legalize their status. I would give them amnesty, not including citizenship for the generation that came illegally, but legalize their status enough to live in the shadows. I think it will be a winning position. I argued it on the merits in 2006, not because of the Hispanic vote. But today I think I would get an audience among conservatives as a result of the debacle among the Hispanic vote. We changed one policy. We say enforcement and then legalization. And I think we can change the whole dynamic of Republicans and the Latino vote.
Well, it certainly is the case that we need to do more to figure out how to convey our message as conservatives to the Hispanic population of this country, because it's a message that ought to be resonating and clearly didn't last time around. We've also got a larger demographic problem, it seems to me. If you look at, the generation of people who came up, for example, came of age under FDR, many of them who supported FDR would never vote Republican no matter who the candidate was. If you look at the generation, my generation who came of age under Ronald Reagan, it tends to be more of a Republican generation. What I'm concerned about, though, now, if you look at young people who are coming of age now, are we in danger of creating a situation where they, develop the habits of voting Democratic, and we're never able to move away from that?
Well, I'm not that worried about that for two reasons. Number one, the young generally are more liberal than the old. It's the old adage, if you're not a socialist when you're 30, you have no heart. And if you're not a conservative when you're 60, you have no head. All these people who right now are in their 20s and they vote Democratic, I can assure you when they have a mortgage and two kids and want to keep some of their taxes that Democrats are taking from them and sprinkling around, leaving no trace, I think they'll vote Republican. So I think it's sort of inherent in that constituency. But secondly, I mean, I do think Republicans have to understand they are the conservative party. And that is a winning ideology in a country that is clearly center-right by every measure. And I think the problem was that we did not have, I liked Mitt Romney, I think he was a very good man, I think he would have made a great president. But he was not a man who was fluent in conservatism. He spoke it as a second language. He was not the best advocate. He was the best of the field that we had in the primaries, but that was a very weak field. What encourages me, and what I think we have to stick to our principles, is we have a rising generation of articulate, really philosophically fluent conservatives. Paul Ryan, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz coming into the Senate, and the governor, Scott Walker, all across the board, Mitch Daniels, Jeb Bush, who will be there in 2016. We will have, I predict that the field of candidates in 2016 will be as strong as the field of Republican candidates in 1980, which was astonishingly strong. Reagan, Bush Sr., Bob Dole. It was a whole generation of admirable, and I think the brand will be improved and the message will be much stronger. So the idea is not to become a second liberal party. It's to be conservative, but to do it better. And I think that generation is right at hand. This isn't a time for retreat or for despair.
No, you're exactly right. I think there's way too much hand-wringing among some in our party suggesting that this means we need to move to the center or move to the left, which would be wrong. Charles, I can't let you go without asking you about this, the tragic, really, news of the day, the resignation of General Petraeus and the revelation that he's been having an affair with his biographer. What's your sense of the implications of that and of this unfolding narrative of an FBI investigation that somehow led to the discovery of the affair?
Well, clearly, we're going to learn a lot about this and about the internecine warfare within the administration, how it relates to Benghazi. All this will come out. There's some really, I would say, awful irony about this, apart from the real tragedy, because this really is an American hero. He did something that hadn't been done since MacArthur, saving a war that was being lost. But I think what's going to be, that the story will come out. But I would just say, as of tonight, when we know so little, I would just say how sad it is that a great American, a public servant, has had to resign and leave public life in this way. But I think on the story of Benghazi, it will now come out because the mainstream media, which stayed away from this, they didn't want to endanger Obama's re-election. Now that there's sex involved, that it's a sex scandal, it will become a story that they will pursue for the worst reasons, and it will all come out in great detail. It won't only be Fox, it'll be everybody on this, because now it'll be a salacious story that will sell newspapers. That's an unfortunate truth, but I think it's a truth.
I think you're right, Charles. Well, thank you very much for being